It's not an easy task to talk about the Holy Guardian Angel, and this is for several reasons. The first being that the Holy Guardian Angel isn't a physical entity. Therefore, it's a lot harder to describe than, say, a pickup truck or a Wellington boot. And as is always the case when trying to describe non-physical experiences, people just get their knickers in a twist over whose description is true. But there's no true way of describing a non-physical experience that is only ever subjective. And the whole point of the Holy Guardian Angel is that it's not someone else's experience, but yours, that only ever matters. So while it's helpful to encourage others to be open to encounter their HGA, their Holy Guardian Angel, what tends to be less helpful is declaring things like, no, that wasn't a proper encounter because you didn't approach it in the traditional way. Or even worse, what you encountered was a parasite posing as your HGA because you didn't do the specific version of the working that I like. It's not up to us to judge the validity of other people's spiritual encounters. The second reason why it's so hard to talk about the Holy Guardian Angel is that while there are some incredibly helpful how-to guides out there, some grimoires that can help you encounter your own HGA, unfortunately, just like with all magical operations, one of the most essential ingredients is completely unpredictable, with many variable parts. And that variable ingredient is the reason why it's futile to take a scientific, highly controlled approach to these experiments. And it's the reason why following very precise how-to guides won't always produce the same outcomes. And that variable ingredient is you, the person performing the magic. Your results won't be the same as someone else's who has, say, great clairaudience skills. Or maybe they have a different religious baggage from yours. Or maybe they have aphantasia. Or maybe they have a very developed sense of their own mind. Or maybe they don't. Or maybe they like to experience the world through the lens of logic. Or maybe they like to experience the world through the lens of emotion. Or maybe they like to experience the world through the lens of aesthetic relationships or energetic resonance or any other modality that the writers of these how-to guides never even considered. And then the third reason why it's difficult to talk about the Holy Guardian Angel is because depending on the underlying assumptions that people have about how the world works, they'll talk about it in different terms. So let's take, for example, an idealist. Like me, you probably know this by now, who believes that the material realm is a product of mind and that mind itself is the primary building block of the universe, right? So for that person who believes it's all mind, saying that the HGA is an aspect of mind is self-evident. Everything's an aspect of mind. There's nothing that's not an aspect of mind. And for that person, understanding how mind works helps them to understand what aspect of mind the HGA is. But then a realist will come along who believes that no, mind is a product of the material world, not a cause for it. And the material world exists whether there's a mind there to experience it or not. And brains are generators of mind rather than manifestations of mind. Well, what they would say is, how can you even say that the HGA is a part of mind? No, my HGA is separate from me. It's not a creation of my brain. So you see the problem. If we can't agree on the nature of the world within which the HGA exists, how can we then define what the HGA is in relation to the world? So with that huge disclaimer and being as upfront as I possibly can in saying that I am and always have been an idealist who believes that everything that can ever be experienced is all an aspect of the one mind, or mind at large, or the mind of God, that I hope will provide a basis for consideration for newcomers to the topic who are confused about what the Holy Guardian Angel is and how they might go about meeting theirs, if they should at all. So I'll say it one last time, just for good measure, these are my opinions based on my research and experiences, not the ultimate truth, which only you can discover concerning your Holy Guardian Angel. Now, it's not a coincidence that in Thelema, the Holy Guardian Angel is equated with the higher self. Sure, some Thelemites will argue that Crowley dabbled in what they like to dismiss as the psychological model. Actually, in my opinion, calling it the psychological model betrays a deep misunderstanding of the idealist model that Crowley clearly espoused, and that's actually an assumed given in all esoteric forms of religion. It's the exoteric forms of religion that assume a realist model of the universe. And naturally, it's the reason why they end up fighting is because they care so much about the details and not at all about the unity of all consciousness. Anyway, when Crowley later declared that spiritual entities are separate from oneself, that wasn't a change of mind. That was making sure, actually you could argue failing to make sure, that realists didn't misrepresent this philosophy by declaring he meant that spirits and immaterial entities were just a delusion generated by our skull meat. No, they're real things, existing in a level or aspect of the mind at large that simply isn't as dense as the level that we commonly think of as the material world. So, what does it mean exactly to say that the HGA is the higher self? Well, if everything is mind, and there are many levels of mind, some very concrete, like the material realm, which is highly defined, highly differentiated, everything separate from everything else, lines of division between things are clear, at least on the surface. Some levels are a little bit more abstract, like dream, where the lines between individual things are a little bit more blurred, like your old school library is also your grandparents' attic, or the Red Queen is also the shopkeeping sheep. And then there are levels that are even more abstract, so abstract in fact that it's just impossible to really experience them, because experiencing them would imply that you are separate from the experience in order to experience it. And the lines of separation just aren't quite as clear on this level. And then all the way up or down, however you like to think about it, to the ultimate level of abstraction where all is really one and there is no differentiation at all. For example, the Gnostics might call this the monad, and at this level of the monad, there is no this and that, it's all just one. And I'd even go further and say that if you can still differentiate the one from not the one, then you're still not at the one, or that ultimate level of abstraction. So this is what Plato described as the ultimate perfection. Trouble is, as I just explained, it can't be experienced. It can be been, but it can't be experienced, at least not subjectively, because then you'd have to be separate from the experience in order to experience it. And at this level, as we've said, there's no separation. So this is the way I see it. The Holy Guardian Angel is a level of mind which is much further in the direction of abstraction than the level of self that we normally identify with. This differentiated level of self in the material realm with a name and a job and an identity. But the Holy Guardian Angel is also close enough to us, to this material level of mind, so far away enough from that ultimate level of abstraction for us to be able to interact with it. Once again, your mileage will vary with what form that interaction will take and what specific steps will be required of you to be able to have that interaction. But there are some general guidelines which I hope can be useful to at least some people. So I've already explained why giving detailed instructions doesn't necessarily make sense, but there are some common traits that the different methods that have worked for different individuals over the years do seem to share. Firstly, they all seem to require at least a degree of withdrawal from society. The Rite of Abramelin notoriously recommends 6 or 18 months, depending on the translation, of total seclusion. But plenty of people have achieved knowledge and conversation with their Holy Guardian Angel without going to such extremes. For example, Aleister Crowley realized that the Rite of Abramelin was completely inaccessible to most people due to the extraordinary resources required for it. And so he wrote Liber Samek to make the experience accessible to anyone. And then in his book Holy Daemon, Frater Acher describes his own encounter with his Holy Guardian Angel, which, by the way, only took 4 weeks. And during that process, he continued going to work for his day job. The second common point is a level of self-denial. Now, many people that I've spoken to who've had spontaneous religious experiences reported that they'd been going through really hard times when it happened to them. In other words, it's not the active decision to be ascetic that's the key here, it's the asceticism itself, however it might happen, whether it's self-induced or forced upon you by life's circumstances. The Abramelin rite actually calls for a very high level of asceticism, living in the simplest conditions possible, a 2-room shelter that should never be left. So one room for cooking and eating and sleeping, and the other room for daily prayer and for performing the actual rite. So I won't go into the sad situation of our world today where this actually sounds like luxury to many people. But in an era before computers and mobile phones, this would have involved a level of boredom that would be unimaginable to people today. Months on end with nothing to distract you except prayer. I guess you'd get pretty spiritual after a while. Which leads me to the third common trait or requirement, which is a level of self-perfection or self-sublimation, which is to say actually making yourself as holy as possible, to use the language of religion. Now let's see what this means. If you're a follower of any particular religion, it means adhering as closely as possible to all the tenets of your religion. And if you don't follow any religion, or if your specific religion shuns the idea of perfection somehow, then imagine what a perfect person would do and cleave as closely as possible to the actions of that perfect ideal. But it does go further than that. Another aspect of making yourself as holy as possible, in the words of Aleister Crowley, is to inflame yourself in prayer. This means constant and prolonged reaching out towards spiritual perfection. And by perfection, of course, I'm talking about the Platonic idea of perfection, the monad, the origin of all things that we were talking about earlier on. I hope it's clear that I'm not talking about some tribal thunder god here or a demiurge. Now, this can mean daily readings from the religious texts of your particular religion, accompanied by daily devotions to a higher plane of existence. So forcing your mind in the direction of spiritual perfection regularly and over an extended period of time. But there are alternative techniques as well, or you could even say additional techniques if you want to use them all. Aleister Crowley performed a daily incantation from the Greco-Egyptian magical papyri called the Stele of Jeu, dubbed the Bornless Rite by the Golden Dawn, or also known as the Headless Rite, in which the speaker starts off by describing this level of self, which is the all-container, or the vast mind, which some people may refer to as simply God, and gradually changes the language to start saying, this is what I am. I am that ultimate perfection within which all exists. So you see what we're talking about here, reaching out regularly and daily in the direction of spiritual perfection to the point of identifying with it in order to refine our material spiritual self into something more holy than it was. And then the fourth and final common point between all these methods is that when the time is right, the seeker reaches out to the holy guardian angel and asks for an interaction. And this can be as simple as simply starting the conversation out loud and waiting to see if the holy guardian angel responds. Or it can be as convoluted as summoning the holy guardian angel into physical appearance, as described at the end of the Book of Abramelin. In any case, the common trait here is that the practitioner tries one way or another, because if you don't try, you don't get. Now, what about you? Do you have any thoughts or experiences to share on the Holy Guardian Angel? Have you met yours or attempted to meet yours? How did it go? And do you have any tips or recommendations for other viewers who might be trying to reach out to their own Holy Guardian Angel? Let me know in the comments, share the knowledge. And for now, if you're enjoying the content, please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so that this video can have a chance of reaching more viewers. And if you'd like to have a one-to-one conversation with me or have a card reading, then you can book a consultation by following the links down below. And then finally, if you happen to be in a privileged situation where you can support a content creator like me, who's doing his best to spread easy-to-access, fresh thinking on esoteric and occult matters, and you'd like to become a part of this community who makes all of this possible and also access the Foolish Fish Discord server, as well as many other perks, then I humbly invite you to visit the Foolish Fish Patreon, and the links for that are down below as well. Memberships start at just $2 a month, which makes a huge difference to me, and I'll take the opportunity right now to thank all of the members at all levels, but in particular the level Infinity members: David Venturini, Caitlin Kopok, Aritz Murueta Ramos, Linda Hendricks, Stephen Hunter, Susanna Red Elfs, Thomas, Bill Shea, and Sleepy Zato. Thank you for keeping this channel alive and for putting food on the table for me and my family. Really, thank you from the bottom of my heart. And thank you also to all the level 3 members whose names you can see scrolling up on the left over here. That's it from me. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and I'll see you very soon with another video. Bye-bye.